Just making sure, Mr. Collins. You're still okay with Mommy's special friend picking up Dylan on Thursdays, right? The words hit me like a physical blow. My hand froze on the sign-out tablet, the cheerful dinosaur-themed lobby of Sunshine Steps Daycare suddenly spinning around me. Ms. Jenny, the afternoon supervisor, continued organizing cubbies as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb in my life. I'm sorry. What friend? My voice sounded distant, as if someone else was speaking through me. Ms. Jenny looked up, her expression shifting from routine friendliness to confusion. The gentleman who's been picking up Dylan on Thursdays for the past month? Tall guy, beard, drives the silver SUV? Your wife added him to the authorization list back in February. February, 2 months ago, while I was working late every Thursday finishing the Henderson project. Of course, I managed, forcing a smile that felt like it might shatter my face, just making sure we're on the same page. My ears were ringing, blood rushing so loudly I barely heard Ms. Jenny's response about Dylan having a great day with the finger paints. I mechanically signed the tablet, knelt to hug my 4-year-old son, and somehow made it to the parking lot before my knees threatened to give out. Dylan chattered happily from his car seat as I sat motionless behind the steering wheel, my mind racing to process this revelation. Special friend, authorization list, Thursdays. The pieces assembled themselves into a picture I couldn't bear to look at directly. Daddy, why aren't we moving? Dylan's innocent question snapped me back to the present. Just checking some messages, buddy, I lied, starting the car with trembling hands. I drove home on autopilot, nodding at Dylan's stories about dinosaurs and playgrounds while my thoughts spiraled. Melissa and I had been married for 7 years. We had a beautiful home, a perfect son, careers we were passionate about. We were the couple friends came to for relationship advice. We did date nights every other Saturday. We went to marriage seminars at church for God's sake. And apparently she had a special friend who was now part of our son's life. At home, I moved through the motions of our evening routine, dinner preparation, bath time for Dylan, bedtime stories, while sending careful texts to mutual friends. Had anyone seen Melissa on recent Thursdays? Did anyone know about this friend? The responses were uniformly negative or confused. When Dylan was finally asleep, I sat at our kitchen island, staring at the family photos lining our refrigerator. Melissa wouldn't be home for hours. Thursday was her yoga and girls' night ritual. The irony made my stomach clench. I opened her iPad, the one we shared the password for because married people don't need secrets from each other. Her calendar confirmed what the daycare had revealed. Every Thursday for the past 8 weeks had a blocked-out afternoon appointment labeled simply R330. R, just an initial, not even a name I could curse or search for. I scrolled back further, looking for patterns, for warning signs I might have missed. When had my life shifted from what I thought it was to whatever this was? When had I become the husband who didn't know who was picking up his own son? My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Class running late, be home by 9, love you. I stared at those 3 words, love you, wondering if they had ever been true or if they were just another script we followed to maintain the appearance of a perfect marriage. I didn't write back. Instead, I poured myself a rare weekday drink and made a decision. Next Thursday, I would cancel my afternoon meetings. I would see exactly who this special friend was, and then I would decide what to do with the ruins of what I'd thought was a happy marriage. Melissa and I met in graduate school 8 years ago. She was studying clinical psychology while I was finishing my MBA. We quite literally bumped into each other at the university library, sending her stack of research papers flying. As we gathered them together, laughing at the cliché of it all, I asked her to coffee. 3 hours of conversation later, I knew she was different from anyone I'd ever met. Melissa had a radiant quality that drew people to her, intelligent, compassionate, with a laugh that made you feel like you'd accomplished something special by causing it. She had this habit of truly focusing on whoever was speaking, making them feel like the only person in the room. It was intoxicating to be the recipient of that attention. You know what I like about you, David, she'd said during our 3rd date? You're steady, reliable. I've dated too many guys who were exciting but ultimately couldn't be counted on. I'd taken it as a compliment then. Now I wondered if steady had eventually translated to boring in her mind. Our courtship was swift but not reckless. Within 6 months we were engaged, and we married the following spring in a garden ceremony surrounded by friends and family. Everyone said we were perfect together, the ambitious, level-headed businessman and the insightful, warm-hearted psychologist. We complemented each other. We made sense. The early years were everything I'd hoped marriage would be. We traveled, established our careers, bought our first home, and had endless conversations about everything and nothing. When disagreements arose, we navigated them with the communication tools Melissa knew from her training. I thought we were building something unbreakable. When Dylan was born 4 years ago, our lives shifted as all parents' lives do. The sleepless nights, the new responsibilities, the renegotiation of roles and time. It was challenging, but strengthening. Or so I believed. Melissa took 6 months off, then returned to her private practice with reduced hours. I adjusted my schedule to share childcare responsibilities as much as possible. "We're in this together," had been our mantra, equal partners. The subtle changes began about 2 years ago. Small things I could only identify in retrospect. Melissa started taking more care with her appearance, refreshing her wardrobe, trying new hairstyles. She joined a gym with a friend from her practice. She seemed more distant during our conversations, often checking her phone or claiming exhaustion when I wanted to discuss something important. "It's just the balance of work and motherhood," she explained when I asked if everything was okay. "I'm trying to reclaim parts of myself that got lost in becoming a mom." I'd supported her, of course, encouraged her to take time for herself, to nurture her friendships and interests. When she started a weekly yoga class followed by dinner with girlfriends, I'd adjusted my schedule to be home with Dylan, never questioning the details. The past year had brought new stresses. My firm took on the Henderson project, which meant longer hours and more travel. Melissa's practice grew busier as mental health needs increased post-pandemic. We were like ships passing, maintaining the household and Dylan's needs, but rarely connecting meaningfully with each other. Still, I'd believed we were solid, navigating a busy season together, committed to the long game. We still said "I love you" daily, still kissed goodbye each morning, still had date nights when we could manage them, even if they increasingly felt like items to check off a list rather than genuine reconnections. There had been no screaming fights, no obvious problems, no clear warning that our foundation was cracking, just a gradual cooling, a growing sense of going through motions, a quiet distance I'd attributed to the normal evolution of a long-term relationship. Was that what had led to this special friend? Had I been so absorbed in work, so complacent in our marriage, that I'd missed signs of her unhappiness? Or had Melissa simply decided that the steadiness she once valued no longer fulfilled her? As I sat in our kitchen, examining memories for clues, one conversation from 6 months ago suddenly gained new significance. We'd been getting ready for bed, one of the few times we were both fully present in the same room. "Do you ever feel like we're just playing the roles we're supposed to play?" Melissa had asked, applying her nightly face cream. "Like we're following a script of what marriage and parenthood should look like, rather than what we actually want?" I dismissed it as professional overthinking. Everyone follows scripts sometimes. That's how society functions. She'd looked disappointed, though I hadn't understood why at the time. "I guess I'm just wondering if there's more, if we're missing something by always doing what's expected instead of what's authentic." "We have a good life, Mel," I'd responded, already turning back to my book. "Maybe authenticity is overrated compared to stability." Had that been it? The moment when she decided to look elsewhere for whatever she felt was missing? Or had it been building long before that conversation, a slow deterioration I'd been too oblivious to notice? The questions circled endlessly as I waited for her to come home, examining our years together for signs I might have missed, wondering if the life I'd believed in had ever really existed at all. The week between discovery and confirmation stretched endlessly. I moved through my days in a fog, maintaining normalcy for Dylan's sake while conducting what felt like an investigation into my own life. I started with practical details, confirming what the daycare had told me. A call to the director on Friday morning, with an excuse about updating our family records, revealed that a man named Robert Kendall had indeed been added to Dylan's authorized pickup list on February 3rd. The form had Melissa's signature and all the required information: his relationship to Dylan, family friend, contact details, and even his driver's license number for identity verification. The thoroughness of it made me physically ill. This wasn't a casual oversight or a one-time arrangement. This was premeditated, planned, sustained deception. I searched the name online, finding dozens of Robert Kendalls in the greater Boston area. Without more details, it was impossible to narrow down which one might be picking up my son. I briefly considered calling every one of them, but recognized the madness in that approach. Instead, I turned to our shared digital life, feeling like a hacker in my own marriage. The iPad revealed little beyond the calendar appointments. Her email showed nothing suspicious. Either there was nothing to find, or she was being careful. The shared family photo account hadn't been updated in months. Her phone would likely tell me more, but it was always with her, and password protected with her fingerprint. The level of mistrust I was now feeling disturbed me almost as much as the situation itself. I had never been the jealous type, never felt the need to check up on Melissa. Now I was contemplating ways to access her private communications, and the thought made me almost as sick as the reason behind it. On Saturday, during our usual family morning at the park, I watched Melissa pushing Dylan on the swings, her laughter carrying across the playground. She looked exactly the same as she had a week ago, before I knew about Robert. Same smile, same gentle way with our son, same casual affection when she caught my eye and waved. How was that possible? How could she seem so unchanged while my entire reality had been upended? That afternoon, while she was shopping, I made the decision to look at our phone records, something I had access to as the account holder. The past 3 months showed a pattern of calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize, concentrated on Wednesdays and Thursdays. The most recent had been Thursday morning, shortly before our 3:30. I saved the number but didn't call it. Not yet. I needed more information first. "You've been quiet this weekend," Melissa remarked Sunday night as we cleaned up after dinner. "Everything okay at work?" "Just preoccupied," I replied, studying her expression for signs of guilt or concern. There were none. "Actually, I might need to adjust my schedule this week. Would you be able to handle daycare pickup on Thursday?" A flicker of something, dismay, concern, crossed her face before she composed herself. "Oh, Thursday is tricky with my afternoon clients, but I can try to reschedule if you really need me to." "No, don't worry about it. I'll figure something out." I turned away, unable to maintain the pretense of normal conversation, wondering if she would now warn her special friend that the usual arrangement had to change. Monday and Tuesday passed in anxious anticipation. I went through the motions at work, at home, in conversation, while constantly fighting the urge to confront Melissa immediately. But I needed to be certain, needed to see for myself. On Wednesday, I made the necessary arrangements at work, explaining to my boss that I needed to take personal time on Thursday afternoon. He was understanding. I rarely took time off, and my work on the Henderson project had earned some flexibility. That evening, I casually mentioned to Melissa that I'd worked everything out for Thursday. "Don't worry about daycare pickup. It's handled." Again, that momentary expression, almost panic, before she nodded. "Great. That works out well since I couldn't move those client appointments." After she went to bed, I checked her iPad again. The R3:30 appointment remained on her calendar. No cancellation, no adjustment. Whatever was happening, she hadn't called it off despite my schedule change. Thursday morning arrived with a surreal quality. Melissa and I moved through our normal routine: breakfast with Dylan, the daily check-in about schedules, the quick kiss goodbye. Only the slightly dark circles under her eyes suggested anything unusual. Had she slept poorly from guilt, or was I imagining things? "Have a good day," she said at the door, the same words she'd spoken hundreds of times before. "Love you." I echoed the phrase automatically, wondering if either of us meant it anymore. Instead of going to my office, I drove to a coffee shop near Dylan's daycare, setting up my laptop to maintain the appearance of working while I waited. At 3:15, I moved to my car, parking where I could observe the entrance without being immediately visible. At 3:28, a silver Audi SUV pulled into the lot. A man emerged, tall, bearded, perhaps in his early 40s, wearing expensive-looking casual clothes and sunglasses despite the cloudy day. He moved with the confident ease of someone following a familiar routine. Robert Kendall. The name now had a face, and the abstract threat had become concrete. I watched as he entered the building, my hands gripping the steering wheel to stop them from shaking. 10 minutes later, he emerged holding Dylan's hand, my son looking up at him with the relaxed familiarity of someone he knew well. Dylan was laughing at something the man said, swinging his dinosaur backpack with his free hand. The sight of my child, comfortable with this stranger, struck me with physical force. This wasn't just about Melissa and whatever betrayal she was engaged in. This was about our son, being introduced to someone significant enough to be called a special friend, given pickup privileges, integrated into his life, all without my knowledge or consent. I watched them get into the SUV, fighting every instinct to rush over and confront them immediately, but causing a scene in front of Dylan would traumatize him. I needed to be strategic, not reactive. I followed at a careful distance as the silver SUV left the daycare lot. They drove for about 15 minutes, eventually pulling into a public park with playgrounds and walking trails, a park in a completely different direction from our home, one we rarely visited as a family. From my position in the parking area, I could see them settle at a picnic table. The man produced a snack from a bag, Dylan's favorite apple slices and peanut butter. I could tell even from a distance. My son seemed completely at ease, talking animatedly between bites. As I sat watching this alternate version of my family life unfold, my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "In session until 5. Everything going okay with pickup?" The casual deception of it, the absolute confidence that I remained ignorant, crystallized everything I'd been feeling into cold, clear resolve. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I continued observing until they finished their snack and moved to the playground, where the man pushed Dylan on the swings, just as I had done hundreds of times before. At 4:45, they returned to the SUV. I followed them again, this time to a frozen yogurt shop Dylan and I had visited together just last weekend. Another special treat, another familiar ritual being replicated with this special friend. At 5:20, they finally headed toward our neighborhood. I stayed well back, already knowing their destination. Sure enough, the silver SUV pulled into our driveway just as Melissa's car arrived from the opposite direction. Perfect timing, the coordinated dance of deception. I parked down the street, watching as Melissa greeted them both with easy familiarity. There was a brief conversation, then the man knelt to Dylan's level for what appeared to be a goodbye. My son hugged him before running inside with Melissa. The man lingered a moment, watching them enter the house before returning to his vehicle. As he pulled out of our driveway, I made a decision. Instead of following him, I drove to the home of my closest friend, Mark. I needed a safe place to process what I'd seen and determine my next steps. I needed someone who could keep me grounded before I confronted the woman who had systematically dismantled everything I thought I knew about our life together. Mark listened without interruption as I recounted everything: the daycare discovery, the week of investigation, and the afternoon surveillance. When I finished, he remained silent for several moments, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What do you think is actually happening here, David? Because there are several possibilities." "Like what?" I demanded. "What possible innocent explanation could there be for a man I've never met picking up my son, taking him to parks and for treats, and being called Mommy's special friend?" "I'm not saying it's innocent," Mark clarified. "I'm saying you need to be clear about what you're accusing Melissa of before you confront her. Is this a physical affair, an emotional one, or is it something else entirely?" The question deflated my righteous anger somewhat. Despite all I'd observed, I hadn't actually seen romantic interaction between Melissa and this man. No kisses, no hand-holding, nothing overtly indicating a sexual relationship. What I had seen was familiarity, coordination, and the integration of this person into Dylan's life, all without my knowledge. I don't know exactly what it is, I admitted. But whatever it is, she's been lying about it, systematically, for months. Mark nodded soberly. Then that's what you need to focus on in the conversation. The deception itself, not assumptions about what may or may not be happening romantically. It was sound advice. After another hour of discussion and several glasses of water, I'd refused anything stronger, needing clarity. I felt ready to return home and face whatever awaited me. When I arrived, Dylan was already in bed. Melissa was in the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be a nice dinner. Wine glasses out, candles ready to be lit. A peace offering? Or had this been planned regardless? "There you are," she said, smiling as I entered. "I was getting worried. Your phone kept going to voicemail." I realized I'd turned my phone off while at Mark's. "We need to talk," I said, making no move to come closer or return her smile. Her hands stilled in the middle of chopping vegetables. "That sounds serious. What's going on?" "Who is Robert Kendall?" The question landed between us like a physical object. The color drained from her face, her eyes widening with what looked like genuine fear. Not confusion, not indignation, fear. She knew exactly who I was asking about. "How do you know his name?" I finished for her. "The daycare told me when I asked who was on Dylan's authorized pickup list. The list you added him to without discussing it with me." She set down the knife carefully. "David, I can explain." "Please do," I said, remaining by the doorway. "Explain why a man I've never met has been picking up our son every Thursday for 2 months. Explain why you've been lying about your whereabouts on those days. Explain why Dylan calls him Mommy's special friend." "It's not what you think," she began, the most cliched response possible. "What exactly do I think, Melissa? Because right now, I don't know what to think. All I know is that you've been systematically deceiving me about something significant enough to involve our child." She took a deep breath, visibly collecting herself. "Robert is my colleague from the practice." "The psychology practice? The one where you see clients every Thursday afternoon? Except clearly you don't, since you've been having him pick up Dylan instead." "I do see clients on Thursdays," she countered, "just not all afternoon." "So you've been lying about your schedule. Why? And why involve our son in the deception?" Melissa closed her eyes briefly. "Can we sit down, please? This is complicated." I didn't move. "I'm not interested in being managed right now, Melissa. I'm interested in the truth, for once." Her face hardened slightly at my tone. "Fine. Robert and I have been working on a book together, a professional collaboration on childhood trauma and family systems. We started meeting on Thursday afternoons to work on it because that's when our schedules aligned." "A book," I repeated flatly. "And you didn't tell me about this because I wanted it to be a surprise when we had a publisher," she said quickly. "And because I knew how you'd react to any change in our childcare arrangement. You're so rigid about schedules and routines." "So instead of having an adult conversation with your husband about a professional project, you created an elaborate deception involving our child?" She flushed. "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible." "It is terrible, Melissa. It's a betrayal of trust on multiple levels. And it doesn't explain why you needed Robert to pick up Dylan. Why not use the daycare's extended hours? Why introduce our son to someone I've never even met?" She hesitated, and I knew instinctively that we were approaching a deeper truth. "The book meetings are at Robert's house," she finally admitted. "He has a home office with all the reference materials we need. It made sense for Dylan to be there too, so I could work longer without worrying about daycare closing. Robert has kids too. They're with their mother on Thursdays, but he has toys and a playground set up in his backyard. Dylan loves it there." "And none of this warranted a conversation with me? Your husband? Dylan's father?" "I knew you wouldn't approve," she said, a note of defiance entering her voice. "You'd see it as inappropriate, regardless of how professional the situation actually is." "What I see as inappropriate is the secrecy," I countered. "The calculated deception. Setting up pickup authorization behind my back. Creating a whole alternate Thursday routine that I knew nothing about." "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "It evolved gradually. We started meeting at cafes, but it was hard to focus. His house was more conducive to work. Then one Thursday, Daycare called that they were closing early for a water main break, and he offered to pick up Dylan since I was in session. It went so well that it just became our arrangement. An arrangement you deliberately hid from me. I didn't know how to bring it up after it had already started, she said, frustration evident. I knew you'd be upset that I hadn't discussed it from the beginning. So you just continued lying indefinitely? What was the end game here, Melissa? Were you ever going to tell me about any of this? She looked away. When the book was finished, when I had something concrete to show for the time I'd spent, something you'd respect. The statement carried an undercurrent of resentment that caught me off guard. What does that mean? When have I ever not respected your work? You respect the therapy practice because it brings in income, she said carefully. But my academic interests, my writing ambitions, you've always treated those as cute hobbies. Melissa's little projects, you called them. Had I? I searched my memory, finding uncomfortable evidence that she might be right, but that didn't justify what had happened. Even if that's true, it doesn't excuse the level of deception you've engaged in. This isn't just about hurt feelings or misunderstandings. You've been lying to me, Melissa, systematically, for months, about our son. I know, she whispered, the defiance draining away. I know how it looks. It started small and then I didn't know how to walk it back. The longer it went on, the harder it became to tell you. Is there more? I asked bluntly. Is this relationship with Robert purely professional? Her head snapped up, genuine shock in her expression. Yes, God, David, he's married, happily married. This is a professional collaboration, nothing more. I wanted to believe her, but the trust between us had been so thoroughly damaged that certainty felt impossible. I followed you today, I admitted. I saw him pick up Dylan, saw them at the park together, at the frozen yogurt shop, saw you meet them at home. Her eyes widened. You were spying on us? I was trying to understand what was happening in my own family, I corrected, because apparently I can't trust my wife to tell me the truth. Melissa sat heavily on one of the kitchen stools. This is all wrong. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was going to tell you everything once we had the draft finished. When would that have been? Another month, maybe 2. She looked up at me pleadingly. David, I swear this isn't what you're thinking. I've made a terrible mistake in how I handled this, but I haven't been unfaithful, not physically, not emotionally. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did believe her. The explanation aligned with what I'd observed, but another part couldn't move past the methodical deception, the ease with which she'd maintained it, and what that suggested about our relationship. I need time to process this, I said finally, and I need to meet him. Meet Robert? She looked surprised. Yes, the man who's been spending time with my son for 2 months. I think I'm entitled to know who he is, don't you? She nodded slowly. Of course, that's fair. I can arrange it. Tomorrow, I specified. Not next week, not when it's convenient. Tomorrow. Okay, she agreed quietly. I'll text him tonight. I turned to leave this kitchen, suddenly unable to remain in the same room with her, but paused at the doorway. One more thing. How did Dylan end up calling him Mommy's special friend? That seems like an odd term for a professional colleague. Melissa flushed again. That's my fault. When I first introduced them, I told Dylan that Robert was a special friend who was helping Mommy with an important project. He shortened it to special friend. I should have corrected it, but it seemed harmless. Nothing about the situation was harmless, I thought, but didn't say aloud. Instead, I simply nodded and left the room, retreating to the guest bedroom where I would spend the night, alone with questions that had been partially answered but trust that remained fundamentally broken. The meeting with Robert Kendall took place the following afternoon at a neutral location, a coffee shop equidistant from both our workplaces. Melissa had arranged it as promised, then made herself scarce, recognizing that her presence would complicate an already tense situation. I arrived early, securing a corner table with enough privacy for a difficult conversation. When he walked in, I recognized him immediately, the same tall, bearded man I'd observed with my son. Up close, he looked older than I'd initially thought, perhaps mid-40s, with intelligent eyes and a cautious expression. David, he greeted me, extending his hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I understand this is an extremely uncomfortable situation. I shook his hand briefly, gesturing for him to sit. Uncomfortable doesn't begin to cover it. He nodded, accepting this without argument. I owe you an apology. I should never have agreed to the arrangement with Dylan without ensuring you were fully informed and comfortable with it. His direct acknowledgement took me slightly off guard. I'd expected defensiveness or minimization. Why did you, I asked, agree to it knowing I wasn't aware? Robert considered the question carefully. Initially, it was just one emergency pickup when daycare closed unexpectedly. After that, Melissa assured me you were fine with the arrangement, but were just very busy with work. By the time I realized you might not actually know, we'd established a routine that Dylan seemed to enjoy. And you didn't think to confirm directly with me, to introduce yourself, perhaps? He had the grace to look genuinely remorseful. I should have. That was a serious lapse in judgment on my part. As a father myself, I should have known better. Melissa says you're working on a book together, I said, watching his expression closely. Yes, a clinical guide on family systems approaches to childhood trauma. It builds on research we've both been involved with through the practice. Show me, I requested. Without hesitation, he opened his laptop and pulled up a document. Over 200 pages of what appeared to be legitimate academic writing, complete with citations, case studies, anonymized, and clearly organized chapters. The file history showed regular updates dating back to January, consistent with Melissa's timeline. It wasn't definitive proof of innocence, but it was substantial evidence that at least part of her explanation was truthful. There really was a book project. Melissa is brilliantly insightful about attachment patterns, Robert commented as I skimmed the document. Her contributions to these chapters on parent-child dynamics have been invaluable. I looked up at him sharply. Are you having an affair with my wife? He didn't flinch at the directness of the question. No, absolutely not. My relationship with Melissa is purely professional and collegial. I'm happily married to my wife of 15 years. You can meet her if that would help you feel more comfortable. His steady gaze and calm demeanor were either those of an innocent man or an exceptional liar. My instincts leaned toward the former, but recent events had severely damaged my faith in my own judgment. Tell me about the Thursdays with Dylan, I said. What exactly happens during these afternoons? Robert described a routine that matched what I'd observed. Pick up from daycare, a stop at the park, or sometimes his backyard, a snack, and then quiet play while he and Melissa worked on their book in his home office. Sometimes Dylan watched a movie or played with the toys Robert kept for his own children. He's a wonderful kid, Robert added. Curious, well-mannered, creative. You and Melissa are raising him beautifully. The compliment felt like salt in a wound. This stranger knew sides of my son that he'd been experiencing while I remained completely unaware. You understand why this situation is problematic, I stated rather than asked. Completely, he nodded. Regardless of the innocent nature of the actual arrangement, the secrecy was inappropriate and potentially damaging to your family. I should have insisted on transparency from the beginning. We talked for nearly an hour. By the end, I was reasonably convinced that Robert was not having a romantic relationship with Melissa and that the book project was genuine. But this resolved only one aspect of the betrayal I was grappling with. When I returned home that evening, Melissa was waiting anxiously in the living room. Dylan was at a scheduled play date with a neighbor's child, giving us rare privacy to continue our conversation. How did it go? She asked tentatively. I believe him, I said simply. About the book, about the nature of your relationship. Relief washed over her face. Thank you for being willing to meet him. That doesn't fix what's broken here, Melissa. Her relief faded. I know. I've been trying to understand why you felt you needed to hide all this from me, I continued, sitting across from her rather than beside her. Even accepting your explanation about the book and thinking I wouldn't take it seriously, that doesn't justify this level of deception. She was quiet for a long moment. It's not a simple answer. I have time. Melissa took a deep breath. Over the past few years, I've felt increasingly invisible in our marriage, not in dramatic ways. You're not cruel or neglectful, But in subtle ways, I felt my identity narrowing to just Dylan's mom and David's wife. My intellectual interests, my professional ambitions beyond the therapy practice, they've seemed to matter less and less. I started to protest, but she held up her hand. Please let me finish. When the opportunity came up to work on this book with Robert, it felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been dormant. The part that has ideas worth sharing, expertise worth documenting. And I wanted to protect that fragile reconnection with my intellectual self. From me? I asked, genuinely confused. Why would you need to protect it from me? Because whenever I've brought up writing or publishing in the past, you've been dismissive, she said quietly. Not maliciously, but in that distracted, slightly patronizing way that makes it clear you don't see it as important. That's nice, honey, while barely looking up from your phone. Or suggestions that maybe I should focus on the practice since that's where the money is. Had I done that? I searched my memory and found uncomfortable evidence that she might be right. So you decided to lie instead of confronting the issue directly? I didn't plan to lie, she insisted. It really did evolve gradually. The first meetings were during my legitimate breaks between clients. Then as the project gained momentum, I started blocking off more time. When the opportunity came to have Robert help with Dylan, it solved a practical problem while avoiding a difficult conversation. A conversation you should have had, I pointed out. Yes, she admitted. I was a coward. And once the deception started, it was easier to maintain it than face your disappointment or disapproval. The admission hung between us, honest but unsatisfying. The Melissa I thought I knew would never have chosen deception over difficult conversations. But perhaps that was the point. Neither of us was quite who the other thought we were. I don't know where we go from here, I said finally. I believe you about the book and about Robert, but this has damaged my trust in a fundamental way. You were willing to lie to me for months about our son. What else might you lie about if it seemed convenient? Tears filled her eyes. I know I've broken something important. I'm not asking you to just forgive and forget. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild what I damaged. And how would that work exactly? Therapy, she said immediately. Not just me, though I clearly need to examine why I chose deception over directness, but us, together. Marriage counseling with someone who can help us communicate better. Help me be braver about difficult conversations. Help you hear me when I talk about my needs and ambitions. It was a reasonable suggestion, aligned with her professional background, but I wasn't ready to commit to a specific path forward. I need time, I told her. This isn't a situation where I can just decide what happens next. I need to process what's happened and what it means for us. Melissa nodded, disappointment evident but acceptance present too. I understand. For what it's worth, I am truly sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for the choices I made that led us here. You and Dylan deserve better. In the days that followed, we established an uneasy détente. I moved back to our bedroom but maintained emotional distance. We coordinated Dylan's care with careful politeness, both determined to shield him from the tension between us. I took time off work to be present for Thursday daycare pickup, making it clear that the previous arrangement was permanently terminated. Robert sent a formal email apology and withdrew from direct interaction with Dylan, though the book project continued with adjusted scheduling. Melissa showed me their work progress regularly, maintaining transparency about her involvement. Friends noticed the strain between us but respected our privacy when we explained we were working through some issues. My parents, visiting briefly, commented that I seemed distracted, but I deflected their concerns. This wasn't a situation for public discussion or taking sides. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I finally agreed to Melissa's suggestion of marriage counseling, not because I had decided to fully recommit to the relationship, but because I recognized that whatever path we chose, reconciliation or separation, would be healthier with professional guidance. Our first session was as uncomfortable as expected. The counselor, Dr. Brennan, listened to both perspectives without visible judgment, then offered her initial assessment. What I'm hearing is the breakdown of trust resulting from deception, but also a breakdown of communication that preceded it. Melissa felt unheard and unsupported in aspects of her identity and chose secrecy rather than confrontation. David feels betrayed and questions the foundation of the relationship. Both valid experiences that need addressing if there's to be a path forward. It was a clinical but accurate summation. The question that remained unanswered, that would take many more sessions and difficult conversations to determine, was whether that path forward would lead to a stronger marriage or a compassionate uncoupling. As we left that first session, walking to our separate cars in silence, I wondered if the man I had been a month ago, confidently unaware of the fractures in his marriage, would recognize the uncertain future that now stretched before us. And whether, regardless of the outcome, that uncertainty might ultimately lead to something more honest than the illusory stability it replaced. The path to healing, whether toward reconciliation or conscious separation, proved neither quick nor linear. Our weekly sessions with Dr. Brennan became the framework around which we constructed a new understanding of our marriage, our individual needs, and the possibilities for our future. Early sessions focused on the immediate breach of trust, establishing ground rules for rebuilding basic honesty between us. Melissa provided complete transparency about her schedule, her interactions with colleagues, and her continuing work on the book project. I agreed to genuinely listen when she shared her professional aspirations, recognizing how my dismissive attitudes had contributed to her choice of deception over directness. Trust isn't rebuilt through grand gestures, Dr. Brennan explained during our fourth session. It's rebuilt through consistent, repeated experiences of reliability and honesty. Each small promise kept, each difficult truth shared directly, is a brick in the foundation you're attempting to reconstruct. Alongside the counseling, I pursued individual therapy to process my feelings of betrayal and examine my contributions to our communication breakdown. Melissa did the same, working with her own therapist to understand why she had chosen secrecy over confrontation and how to develop healthier patterns. The hardest conversations weren't about Robert or the book project. Those facts had been established and accepted. The most challenging dialogue centered on deeper truths about our marriage that had long remained unspoken. I feel like we've been performing a marriage rather than actually having one, Melissa admitted during a particularly raw session 3 months into our counseling. We do all the right things, date nights, family time, check-ins about practical matters. But when did we last share our fears, our dreams, the parts of ourselves that don't fit neatly into our roles as parents and providers? Her words struck uncomfortably close to home. Our relationship had indeed become largely transactional and role-based. Somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being curious about each other as evolving individuals, settling instead for the comfort of predictable patterns and surface-level communication. I think I've been afraid, I confessed. Not consciously, but beneath the surface. Afraid that if we acknowledge how we're changing as individuals, we might discover we're growing apart rather than together. So it felt safer to focus on the practical aspects of our shared life than risk discovering fundamental incompatibilities. This recognition, that fear had driven both of us toward avoidance rather than authentic connection, marked a turning point in our healing process. It shifted the narrative from simply Melissa's betrayal to a shared responsibility for the state of our marriage. The practical aspects of rebuilding trust continued alongside these deeper explorations. 6 months after discovery, I attended the first public presentation of Melissa and Robert's book project at a professional conference. Watching my wife speak with passion and expertise about her work, seeing her intellectual contributions recognized and valued by peers, I realized how much of her I had failed to acknowledge in recent years. Robert's wife Susan was also present, and our brief conversation helped normalize what had been a source of such upheaval. She was warm, intelligent, and clearly secure in her marriage, offering further reassurance that the relationship between our spouses had indeed been professional rather than romantic. Robert told me everything, she said candidly during a brief moment alone, including his poor judgment in not insisting on transparency with you from the beginning. I hope you know how genuinely remorseful he is about that aspect of the situation. Her straightforward acknowledgement was oddly healing, removing the last lingering doubts about whether I had been told the complete truth about the nature of Melissa and Robert's relationship. The process of reconnection with Melissa moved in fits and starts. Some weeks brought moments of genuine intimacy and renewed hope. Others were marked by setbacks when old patterns reasserted themselves, or when trust felt particularly fragile. Physical intimacy returned gradually, initially hesitant, but eventually becoming a genuine expression of recommitment rather than mere habit. 9 months after Discovery Day, Melissa's book received an offer from a respected academic publisher. She shared the news cautiously, watching my reaction with visible anxiety. "This is incredible," I told her honestly, drawing her into a genuinely celebratory embrace. "I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. I know how much this means to you." The relief and joy in her expression made me acutely aware of how rarely I had offered such unqualified support for her intellectual pursuits in recent years. The moment wasn't just about the book. It was about her being fully seen and valued by her partner. As our healing process continued, we found ourselves redefining not just our marriage but our individual identities within it. I became more deliberate about creating space in our family life for Melissa's professional development and writing ambitions. She became more direct about her needs and boundaries, practicing honest communication even when it felt uncomfortable. Dr. Brennan introduced us to the concept of a relationship vision, a shared understanding of what we wanted our marriage to look and feel like moving forward, beyond just the absence of deception or conflict. "If this relationship healing is successful," she asked during our first anniversary of counseling, "what will your marriage look like? How will you interact? What values will guide your decisions? What promises are you making to each other about how you'll address future challenges?" The exercise forced us to move beyond the immediate work of rebuilding trust to imagine a future worth working toward. We spent weeks refining this vision, discovering both encouraging alignment and revealing differences that required further negotiation. Throughout this process, Dylan remained our shared priority. We protected him from adult concerns while making subtle adjustments to ensure he understood appropriate boundaries with adults outside his immediate family. We established clearer protocols for childcare arrangements, with explicit agreement that transparency about who was caring for our son was non-negotiable. 14 months after Discovery Day, Melissa and I renewed our marriage vows in a private ceremony attended only by Dr. Brennan. Not because our healing was complete, we recognized that rebuilding a relationship is an ongoing process rather than a destination, but because we had consciously chosen to continue that journey together. The vows we exchanged differed significantly from our original wedding promises. Gone were the somewhat generic commitments to love and honor. In their place were specific pledges grounded in the hard-won insights of our healing journey. "I promise to see you completely, not just the parts that fit neatly into our shared life, but all of who you are and who you are becoming. I promise to speak difficult truths directly and compassionately, rather than avoiding conflict or choosing convenience over honesty. I promise to remain curious about your evolving dreams and needs, never assuming that who you were yesterday is who you will be tomorrow." These weren't romantic platitudes, but practical commitments based on a deeper understanding of what had fractured in our relationship and what would be required to prevent similar breaks in the future. As we approach the 2-year mark of what we now call our reconstruction, I recognize that our marriage isn't what it was before the daycare revelation. It's something different, more conscious, more deliberate, requiring more consistent effort than the comfortable but somewhat disengaged relationship we had drifted into. There are still moments when trust feels fragile, when a delayed response to a text message or an unexplained schedule change triggers echoes of past betrayal. But these moments have become less frequent and less destabilizing as our new patterns of communication and transparency become more established. What emerged from the painful process of confronting deception and its underlying causes wasn't a perfect relationship, such things don't exist, but a more authentic one. A marriage based not on assumptions and avoidance, but on courageous conversation, genuine curiosity, and the hard-won wisdom that relationships requiring the least maintenance are often those receiving the least genuine investment. 3 years have passed since that Tuesday afternoon when a casual question from a daycare worker shattered my understanding of my marriage and family. Looking back from this vantage point, I can now see that day as both an ending and a beginning, the collapse of a relationship built on comfortable assumptions, and the first step toward building something more intentional and authentic. The transformation hasn't been solely in our marriage. Both Melissa and I have changed as individuals, developing capacities and insights we might never have achieved without facing this profound challenge. I've learned to recognize my tendency toward rigid thinking, the binary worldview that initially made it difficult to see Melissa's deception as anything but complete betrayal, or to imagine any path forward that wasn't either immediate forgiveness or permanent separation. This evolving capacity for nuance has benefited not just my marriage, but my relationships with colleagues, friends, and especially with Dylan, now 7 and beginning to navigate the complexities of friendship and school social dynamics. Melissa has developed a voice that no longer shrinks from conflict or retreats into convenient untruths. Her second book, this one written independently, explores the psychology of avoidance and the courage required for authentic communication. She's become a sought-after speaker on relationship dynamics, sometimes sharing elements of our story, with my blessing and appropriate anonymity, to illustrate how deception can grow from seemingly small decisions to protect comfort over truth. Our marriage bears little resemblance to what it was before, where we once moved through our days as efficient partners in a largely logistical enterprise. We now engage as continually evolving individuals choosing connection despite, or perhaps because of, our awareness of its fragility. The comfortable assumption of permanence has been replaced by the more valuable recognition that healthy relationships require ongoing renewal and recommitment. Every marriage is actually many marriages, Dr. Brennan told us during our final regular session. The relationship you began with isn't the one you have now, and it won't be the one you have a decade from now. The question is whether you evolve consciously together or drift unconsciously apart. This perspective has become central to our approach to marriage, recognizing that change is inevitable, that neither of us will remain static, and that continuing to choose each other requires regular reassessment and realignment. The wisdom gained through this journey extends beyond our relationship. I've come to understand trust not as a binary state, present or absent, but as a dynamic quality that exists in degrees, requiring regular maintenance and occasional repair. I've learned that betrayal, while painful, need not be permanently defining. The choice to work through such a fundamental breach can lead to greater authenticity and deeper connection than might have developed without the necessity of conscious rebuilding. Perhaps most importantly, I've recognized that safety in relationships comes not from the absence of problems, but from the commitment to address them honestly. The illusion of perfect stability I once cherished has been replaced by the more valuable reality of resilience in the face of inevitable challenges. Dylan, mercifully, retains no memory of the special friend period or the tension that followed. What he experiences instead is a more present and engaged relationship between his parents, one characterized by authentic communication, mutual support, and explicit appreciation for each other's evolving interests and contributions. Robert Kendall remains a professional colleague of Melissa's, though their collaboration continues with carefully established boundaries and complete transparency. His role in our family story is neither villainized nor minimized, but acknowledged as simultaneously problematic in execution and valuable in what it ultimately revealed about our marriage. Last month, Melissa and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. Rather than exchanging traditional gifts, we each wrote reflections on what we've learned about ourselves, each other, and the nature of commitment during our years together. Melissa wrote about the courage required for vulnerability and her ongoing practice of choosing difficult honesty over comfortable concealment. I wrote about the growth that comes from remaining open to hard truths and the freedom found in releasing rigid expectations of how relationships should function. Neither reflection romanticized the painful journey we had undertaken. Both acknowledged that our current connection exists not despite that experience, but because of our commitment to learning from it. As I look toward the future, the decades of evolution our relationship will continue to undergo, the challenges we have yet to face, the versions of ourselves we have yet to become, I carry a paradoxical certainty. I am less confident about predicting what our marriage will look like in 10 or 20 years, and more confident in our capacity to navigate whatever emerges. This is the unexpected gift hidden within what once felt like unforgivable betrayal. The discovery that relationships built on conscious choice and courageous communication can withstand challenges that would destroy those dependent on comfortable assumption and conflict avoidance. If you find yourself at a similar crossroads, discovering deception, facing betrayal, questioning everything you thought you knew about your relationship, know that the path forward isn't limited to simple forgiveness or clean separation. There exists a third way, the challenging but potentially transformative journey of honest confrontation, mutual accountability, and intentional rebuilding. This path isn't appropriate for every situation. Some betrayals reflect character deficiencies so fundamental that reconciliation would require unhealthy self-compromise. Some relationships lack the foundation of shared values necessary for meaningful reconstruction. But for those relationships with the essential elements for healing, genuine remorse, willingness to examine root causes, commitment to transformation rather than mere damage control, the journey through betrayal can lead to connection more authentic than what existed before. The marriage that emerges won't be a restoration of what was lost. It will be something new, marked by the scars of past wounds, but potentially stronger at those very points, like bones that heal more densely at the sight of a break. This has been my experience, not a simple story of betrayal and forgiveness, but a complex journey of disillusionment, confrontation, excavation of long-buried truths, and ultimately, the creation of something more valuable than what was initially broken. If this story resonates with your own experience, please know you're not alone in navigating these difficult waters. Consider sharing in the comments how you've addressed trust breaches in your relationships, what wisdom you've gained from the process, or what questions you're currently wrestling with. And remember that while betrayal may feel like an ending, it can also, with courage, commitment, and appropriate support, become the beginning of something more honest and ultimately more sustainable than what came before. Thank you for listening to my story.